The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, each droplet creating a different pitch as it struck the greenhouse glass. D minor, if I had to guess. I'd learned to identify the musical notes in everything: the hum of the overhead heaters, B flat, the drip of the irrigation system, F sharp, even the particular frequency of footsteps on gravel varies by weight and gait. It was one of the many things that made most people uncomfortable around me, though the plants never seemed to mind. My fingers moved with practiced precision as I carefully extracted seeds from the Ricinus communis, castor bean, laid out before me on the potting bench. Each seed contained enough ricin to kill an adult human, which was precisely why I kept detailed records of every single one. The poison didn't frighten me. I respected it. Unlike people, toxins were predictable. They followed rules. They made sense. "Meadow, you're talking to yourself again," I said aloud, because sometimes hearing my own voice helped me remember that other people found this strange. Dr. Chen, my therapist, said it was called masking, the exhausting performance of appearing neurotypical. But here, in my greenhouse sanctuary on the outskirts of Newark, there was no one to perform for except the 243 plants I'd cataloged this morning. The vintage Puccini recording crackled from my grandfather's old record player in the corner, filling the humid air with Nessun Dorma. I'd worn through 3 copies of this particular area, learning Italian phonetically from opera recordings because traditional language classes made my skin feel too tight. The language itself had patterns that soothed me, consistent pronunciation rules, logical conjugations. Unlike English with its chaos of exceptions, Italian made sense to my brain. I was labeling the seed container when the greenhouse door crashed open with such violence that I dropped the entire tray. Seeds scattered across the concrete floor like deadly confetti, and my heart rate immediately spiked to what I estimated was around 120 beats per minute. Too fast, too loud, everything suddenly too much. But it wasn't the noise that made me freeze. It was the man. He staggered through the doorway, one hand pressed against the glass as if the structure itself could hold him upright. Rain had plastered his white dress shirt against his torso, and even in my panic, my pattern-seeking brain registered details: expensive fabric, custom-tailored, 4 buttons undone, revealing olive skin and dark chest hair. His face was angular, harsh in its beauty, with a jaw that looked carved from marble, and eyes the color of espresso that were currently unfocused and dilated. Those eyes found mine for just a moment, and I saw something in them that I recognized because I'd felt it myself so many times. The desperate search for sanctuary, for one safe place in a world that made no sense. Then he collapsed, his body hitting my carefully swept floor with a sound I knew I would hear in my nightmares. Not quite a thud, more of a heavy exhale, followed by the absence of all movement. My social anxiety screamed at me to run, to call 911, to do anything except approach this stranger who had violated my sacred space. But my fingers were already moving, checking his pulse at his neck, 140 beats per minute, weak and thready. His skin burned with fever that I estimated at 103 degrees Fahrenheit. "Non morire," I whispered, the Italian spilling out before I'd consciously chosen it. "Non morire qui." Don't die. Don't die here. His eyes fluttered open at the sound, and he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength for someone who appeared to be dying. "Italiano?" His voice was rough gravel, each syllable clearly painful. "Si." I nodded, my own breathing becoming irregular. Physical touch from strangers usually sent me into sensory overload, but something about his grip felt more like an anchor than a violation. "Si, parlo italiano." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost looked like pain. "Aiutami," he rasped. "Help me." Then, in broken fragments, "Veleno, ricino, il mio consigliere, poison, castor bean, my counselor." The words rearranged themselves in my mind like a puzzle I was uniquely designed to solve. I looked at the scattered seeds on the floor, then back at the dying man, and felt the particular calm that always settled over me when I encountered a problem that involved plants rather than people. "Ricina?" I asked, already running through my mental database of toxic plant compounds. "Ti ha avvelenato con ricina." He managed a slight nod, his eyes beginning to close again. Ricin poisoning. I'd studied it extensively, not because I had any intention of using it, but because understanding poisons was essential to understanding their antidotes. My obsessive research into toxic plants, which most people found disturbing, had just become this stranger's only hope. "Quanto tempo fa?" I asked, needing to know when he'd been poisoned. "How long ago?" "6 ore." 6 hours. He could barely form the words. 6 hours since exposure. That meant we were in the critical window, past the point where simple decontamination would work, but before the full cascade of organ failure began. The ricin would already be in his bloodstream, binding to his cells, shutting down protein synthesis. Without intervention, he would experience increasingly severe vomiting, diarrhea, seizures, and ultimately, death within 3 to 5 days. But I had something most people didn't: an encyclopedic knowledge of obscure plant compounds and their interactions, combined with a greenhouse full of rare specimens. "Non ti muovere," I instructed, gently removing his hand from my wrist. "Don't move." "Posso aiutarti, ma devi fidarti di me." "I can help you, but you have to trust me." I stood, my mind already racing through the calculations. Ricin had no approved antidote, but there were experimental treatments using specific enzyme inhibitors found in certain plants. The Jatropha curcas seeds I'd ordered from Brazil contained compounds that could potentially interfere with ricin's binding process. Combined with activated charcoal from burnt willow bark and a diuretic tea from dandelion root to help flush his system. My hands moved without conscious thought, gathering supplies from various corners of the greenhouse. The mortar and pestle I used for seed extraction, the distillation equipment I'd salvaged from a university surplus sale, containers of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, each one labeled with both common and scientific names in my precise handwriting. "Come ti chiami?" I asked as I worked, because despite my difficulty with social interaction, I needed to know his name. "What's your name?" "Dante." The word was barely a whisper. "Dante Marchetti." Dante, like the poet, appropriate for someone who appeared to be descending into his own personal inferno on my greenhouse floor. "Io sono Meadow," I replied, crushing the Jatropha seeds with careful pressure. The oil inside was toxic itself, but in the right concentration, combined with the right compounds. "Meadow Gallagher." He tried to smile, though it came out more as a grimace. "Irlandese. Irish on my father's side, yes." I continued working, my voice taking on the flat, focused tone it always did when I was solving a problem. "My mother was from Sicily. She taught me to love plants before she died when I was 8. My father didn't understand why I preferred greenhouse time to people time. Still doesn't." I was over-explaining, the way I always did when anxious, but Dante's eyes had closed again, and somehow it was easier to talk to him when I didn't have to maintain eye contact. The social exhaustion I usually felt was absent, replaced by the pure focus of a task I actually understood. The rain continued its percussion against the greenhouse roof as I worked, mixing, measuring, calculating dosages that existed nowhere in any medical textbook, because I was essentially inventing a treatment protocol in real time. Most people would have called this reckless. Dr. Chen would probably call it dangerous. But the alternative was watching this man die on my floor, and something about the desperate way he'd grabbed my wrist, the way his eyes had cleared when I spoke his language, made that unacceptable. "Questo ti farà star mal," I warned as I knelt beside him with the first mixture, a dark, oily liquid that smelled of burnt earth and bitter seeds. "This will make you sick." "Ma è necessario." but it's necessary. I had to support his head with my free hand, and the intimacy of the gesture made my skin prickle with discomfort. But I forced myself to stay present, to remain calm, because he needed me to be the stable element in whatever chaos had brought him here. He swallowed the mixture without hesitation. Trust I hadn't earned but was being given anyway. Within minutes, he was vomiting violently into the bucket I'd placed beside him, his body convulsing with the effort of expelling the poison. "Buono," I said, rubbing his back in awkward circles because I'd read that's what people did for comfort, even though I found the texture of his rain-soaked shirt deeply unpleasant against my palm. "Il veleno deve uscire." Good. The poison needs to come out. Between bouts of sickness, he spoke in fragments. La mia organizzazione, tradimento, mia figlia. My organization, betrayal, my daughter. I didn't ask for details. Details about organizations and betrayal sounded like the kind of complicated social dynamics that I'd spent my life avoiding. But my daughter, that phrase landed differently, because even I understood that whatever else this man was, he was also a father desperate to survive. For the next 3 hours, I administered treatments in careful sequence. The enzyme inhibitor mixture every 45 minutes. Activated charcoal suspended in water to bind remaining toxins. Yarrow tea to reduce his fever. Milk thistle tincture to protect his liver from the processing load. I moved through my greenhouse like a botanist-pharmacist hybrid, pulling knowledge from dozens of obscure research papers I'd memorized during my obsessive deep dives into ethnobotany. Each plant had its purpose, its precise role in the delicate chemistry of keeping this stranger alive. "Perché?" Dante asked during a moment of relative clarity, after the worst of the vomiting had passed. "Why?" "Perché mi stai aiutando?" Why was I helping him? It was a fair question. The rational answer was that I couldn't let someone die when I had the knowledge to prevent it. But there was something else, something harder to articulate. "Perché hai chiesto aiuto nella mia lingua?" I said finally, surprising myself with the honesty. "Because you asked for help in my language. E perché capisci come sentirsi fuori posto. And because you understand what it's like to feel out of place." I didn't know why I believed that last part. Maybe it was the way his perfectly tailored clothes contradicted his desperate arrival. Maybe it was the gentleness in his fevered eyes despite the hardness of his features. Or maybe I was projecting, seeing my own isolation in a stranger's face. But Dante nodded slowly, as if I'd said something profound instead of strange. "Anche tu," he whispered. "You too. Ti senti sempre fuori posto. You always feel out of place." The rain had softened to a gentle patter by the time his fever finally broke. I'd moved him to the small cot I kept in the corner for when I worked through the night, which was often because plants didn't judge my inability to maintain a normal sleep schedule. His color had improved from the concerning gray to something more natural, and his breathing had steadied to a sustainable rhythm. I sat on my work stool nearby, cataloging seeds because the repetitive motion calmed my overstimulated nervous system. The past few hours had required more social interaction and physical touch than I typically experienced in a month, and my hands were starting to shake with the accumulated stress. "Meadow." His voice was still rough, but stronger. "Grazie." "Prego," I replied automatically, then continued in Italian because switching between languages required too much energy right now. "You should rest. The ricin is still in your system. It'll take days to fully clear. Days I shouldn't take from you." He tried to sit up, winced, and settled back down. "This place, è un santuario." "It's a sanctuary." "Yes." I didn't elaborate on how right he was, how this greenhouse had been my sanctuary for 15 years, ever since I'd bought it with my inheritance from my mother. The one place where I could be exactly myself without explanation or apology. "I understand sanctuaries," Dante said, his eyes tracking the various plants surrounding us. "I grow orchids, rare ones. It's the only time I—" He trailed off, seeming to search for words. The only time the violence stops. Violence. The word hung in the humid air between us, and I felt a strange cognitive dissonance. This man who grew orchids and spoke so tenderly about sanctuary also inhabited a world where people poisoned each other with ricin. "Your counselor," I said, piecing together the fragments he'd mentioned. "He tried to kill you because I wanted out." Dante's laugh was bitter. "Because I discovered I have a 7-year-old daughter I didn't know existed, and I didn't want her growing up with a father who—" He gestured vaguely, as if the rest was obvious. It wasn't obvious to me. I didn't intuitively understand the complex social structures of organized crime, but I understood the concept of wanting to protect a child from a dangerous environment. I'd spent my childhood feeling like the dangerous environment was inside my own head. "Will they come looking for you?" I asked, because that seemed like a practical concern. "Eventually." He met my eyes, and there was something ancient and tired in his gaze. "But not immediately. Paolo will want to be sure I'm dead before he makes his move." Paolo. The counselor turned betrayer. Another name. Another detail in a story that was becoming more complicated than my preference for simplicity could comfortably handle. But then, Dante's eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming him, and I felt a strange sense of relief. Caring for an unconscious patient required no social navigation, no interpretation of subtle cues I routinely missed. Just the straightforward application of botanical knowledge to preserve life. I pulled my worn copy of Toxicologia delle Piante from the shelf and settled back on my stool, ready to monitor his condition through the night. The book's margins were filled with my annotations in both English and Italian, observations about compound interactions that existed nowhere in published literature. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind the clean scent of rain-washed earth. My greenhouse glowed with the soft amber of my work lights, creating a bubble of warmth against the darkness beyond. I'd spent my entire life feeling like an alien in human spaces, never quite fitting in, never quite understanding the unspoken rules everyone else seemed to know instinctively. But here, in this moment, with a dying mafioso on my cot and ricin seeds still scattered across my floor, I felt strangely at ease. Perhaps Dante was right. Perhaps we both understood what it meant to be out of place in the world. Perhaps that understanding was exactly what would save his life. Dante woke screaming at 3:47 a.m., his body convulsing with what I recognized as ricin-induced neurological symptoms, the toxin attacking his nervous system as it broke down. I'd been expecting this, had prepared for it, but the sound of his agony still made my heart rate spike to uncomfortable levels. "Dante, ascolta me." I kept my voice steady, clinical, as I approached with the next treatment mixture. "Listen to me, è il veleno. Passerà. It's the poison. It will pass." His eyes found mine in the dim light, wild with pain and something else. Fear. Not of dying, I thought, but of what he might reveal while his control was compromised. I'd read about how severe poisoning could lower inhibitions, strip away carefully constructed personas. "La bambina," he gasped. "Devo proteggerla." The little girl. I have to protect her. Sofia. Ha solo 7 anni. She's only 7 years old, Sofia. His daughter had a name now, had become real in a way that made my chest feel tight. I helped him drink the willow bark tea I'd brewed, my hands steadier than they should have been given that a strange man was gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. "Drink," I instructed in Italian. "The fever is spiking again. Your brain is swelling slightly from the toxin. It's causing the hallucinations." "Not hallucinations," he insisted, his accent thickening. "Memories. The look on her face when I met her last month. She has her mother's eyes. Green-like. Like." He gestured frantically at something only he could see. "Like Vince Minor," I supplied, because I understood struggling to find comparisons, like periwinkle, the small purple flowers with their distinctive green centers. He laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Yes, exactly like that. You understand. I did understand, in my own way. The desperate need to categorize, to find patterns and connections that made sense of chaos. It was how my autistic brain processed the world, through systematic observation, through finding the underlying structure in seemingly random information. Tell me about the orchids you grow, I said, because redirecting his focus might help with the pain. Also, truthfully, I was curious. It seemed incongruous. A mafia boss cultivating delicate flowers. His breathing began to slow as he latched onto the topic. I have a collection. Rare specimens. Some I've saved from extinction. There's one, a Paphiopedilum rothschildianum, that took me 8 years to coax into blooming. 8 years of precise temperature control, specific light conditions, exact mineral content in the water. His words tumbled out in a mixture of Italian and English, describing growing conditions and soil pH levels with the kind of obsessive detail I recognized in myself. The precision, the need for control in at least one aspect of a chaotic life. 8 years is impressive, I said, checking his pulse, still elevated but more stable. I've been trying to get my Amorphophallus titanum to bloom for 6, the corpse flower. The one that smells like rotting flesh when it flowers? Even in his weakened state, there was amusement in his voice. Fitting for someone who works with poisons. It's actually a protective mechanism, I explained, falling into the comfortable rhythm of botanical facts. The smell attracts carrion beetles for pollination. It's not about death, really. It's about survival. About using whatever tools evolution gave you to ensure the next generation. Dante's eyes sharpened despite the fever. Is that what you're doing? Using your tools to survive? The question felt more penetrating than it should have. I'm using my tools to save you, I replied, deliberately missing his point, or perhaps understanding it too well. The next several hours passed in a rhythm of treatment and rest. I administered compounds at precise intervals, monitoring his vital signs with the same attention I gave to my most delicate specimens. His fever would spike, I would intervene, it would subside. A cycle as predictable as photosynthesis. It was during one of his more lucid periods, around dawn, that he asked the question I'd been dreading. Why do you live alone out here, Meadow Gallagher? Why aren't you at a university somewhere, teaching botany, winning awards? My hand stilled on the mortar where I was grinding dried valerian root. I don't like universities. Too many people. Too much. Performing. Performing? I considered not answering, but his directness invited honesty. I'm autistic. Social interaction is exhausting. Places with lots of people, noise, unpredictable schedules. They make my brain feel like it's shorting out. So I stay here, with my plants. They don't require me to interpret facial expressions, or understand sarcasm, or remember which coworker asked about which aspect of their life. I'd expected the usual response, awkward silence, or worse, well-meaning but patronizing reassurance. Instead, Dante simply nodded. That's why you didn't call 911 when I collapsed. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Partially. Also because you specifically asked for help in Italian, which suggested you might not want official involvement, and because I knew I could help you faster than any hospital. Ricin poisoning isn't something most emergency rooms see regularly, but I've studied it extensively. Why? His question was gentle, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Why study poisons so thoroughly? I resumed grinding the valerian, the repetitive motion helping me organize my thoughts. Because plants are honest. A poison is always a poison in the same way. It doesn't pretend to be safe and then surprise you. Unlike people, who constantly say one thing but mean another, whose facial expressions contradict their words, who expect me to know unspoken rules that I somehow never learned. Dante was quiet for a long moment, and I worried I'd over-explained again, made him uncomfortable with my inability to filter. "I grow orchids for a similar reason," he finally said. "They're demanding, but their demands are consistent. Keep the humidity between 60 and 80%, maintain specific temperatures, provide the right amount of light. Do those things, and they thrive. Fail, and they die. No politics, no betrayal. No, performing, as you say." Something loosened in my chest at his understanding. "Exactly. Except now, someone's trying to kill you because you want to stop performing," I added, because stating the obvious was one of my specialties. "Because you want to leave the organization for your daughter." His expression darkened. "Paolo doesn't see it that way. To him, I'm not a man who wants to be a father. I'm a resource that's trying to leave knowledge and connections that might work against the organization if I'm not controlled." I understood resources. My entire life, people had seen my pattern recognition abilities, my exhaustive knowledge of specific subjects as resources to be utilized. Teachers who wanted me to compete in academic contests when I just wanted to be left alone with my books. Relatives who considered my plant expertise useful until it became too intense and made them uncomfortable. "What will you do?" I asked. "When you're well enough to leave?" Dante's jaw tightened. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for the past 6 months. I can't go to the police. Half of them are paid by my organization. Can't disappear completely. Paolo knows too much about my past, where I might run. And I can't just walk away peacefully, because in my world, retirement isn't an option unless you're dead or useless. So you're trapped." I stated the logical conclusion. Between staying in a life you want to leave and leaving in a way that gets you killed. Yes. The word was heavy with resignation. I focused on preparing his next dose of treatment, letting the familiar process calm my increasingly anxious thoughts. This man's problems were becoming my problems simply because he'd fallen through my door, and I didn't know how to navigate that complexity. "The irony," Dante continued, his voice taking on a bitter edge, "is that I got into this life because my father died young, and I needed to support my mother and sisters. I was 18, angry at the world, and the familia offered structure, purpose, rules I could understand." He laughed without humor. "Sound familiar?" It did sound familiar, uncomfortably so. The appeal of clear rules in a confusing world, of belonging to something that made sense even if it wasn't entirely good. "But the rules change," I observed. "Or the people enforcing them interpret them differently, and suddenly what you thought was structured becomes chaotic anyway." "Exactly." He shifted on the cot, still weak, but more alert. "I realized too late that the structure was an illusion, that the rules only applied until someone powerful enough decided they didn't." I handed him the tea, this time a gentler mixture of chamomile and passion flower to help him rest. As he drank, I noticed details I'd missed during the crisis, the scars on his knuckles, the way he held himself even when injured, the controlled violence lurking beneath exhausted civility. "You've hurt people," I said, because I'd never learned to avoid uncomfortable truths. "In your work." He didn't flinch from the statement. "Yes." "Killed people?" "Yes." His eyes met mine, unflinching. "And before you ask why you should save someone like me, I don't have a good answer. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe Paolo did everyone a favor trying to end me." I considered this, tilting my head in the way that Dr. Chen said made me look like a curious bird. "That's not how I see it. You're not a good person or a bad person. You're a person who did bad things and is now trying to do better. That's more interesting." "Interesting?" He sounded almost amused. "I don't know if that's the word most people would use." "Most people are boring. I replied, which made him laugh. A real laugh this time, warm and genuine. How old are you, Meadow? 29. Why does that matter? Because you're younger than I expected for someone so unflinching. Most people your age would have more illusions about human nature. I returned to my work stool, pulling out my journal to record his latest vital signs. I lost my illusions early. When you can't intuitively read people like everyone else can, you learn to see what they really do rather than what they pretend to do. Actions, not performances. And what do my actions tell you? The question felt like a test. I thought about it carefully, reviewing the past 12 hours in my systematic way. Your actions say you're desperate to protect someone smaller and more vulnerable than yourself, that you're willing to trust a strange woman with botanical expertise over medical professionals you can't trust, that you care deeply about orchids, which suggests you value beauty and patience, and that you're trying to escape a life that's becoming incompatible with who you want to be. Dante stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. No one has ever described me quite like that, he said finally. I'm not good at saying what people expect to hear. I just say what I observe. Don't change that, he said with surprising intensity. Don't ever change that. The words settled into me strangely, like seeds finding soil. Most people wanted me to change, to be less blunt, less intense, more socially appropriate. But Dante was asking for the opposite, and I didn't know what to do with that request. As the morning light began filtering through the greenhouse glass, painting everything in shades of green and gold, I found myself doing something I rarely did, talking about my mother. She was Sicilian, I heard myself say, not sure why I was sharing this. Came to America at 19, met my Irish father at a botanical garden where they both worked. She understood plants the way I do. Like they were people, but better, simpler. Dante listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. She died when I was 8. Pneumonia that turned into something worse because she wouldn't leave her greenhouse even when she was sick. My father sold most of her plants after, said it wasn't healthy for me to spend so much time with dead things. He didn't understand that they weren't dead. They were the only part of her I had left. That's when you started learning Italian, Dante guessed, to feel closer to her. Yes, through her opera recordings. She used to play them while she worked. I'd help her with the plants and she'd sing along, and it was the only time I felt normal, like my brain worked the way it was supposed to. I glanced at him, suddenly self-conscious about the oversharing, but his expression held only understanding. My mother sang too, he said, old Neapolitan songs while she cooked. After my father died, it was the only time she seemed happy, the only time the house felt like home instead of a tomb. We sat in comfortable silence, two people from vastly different worlds united by dead mothers and the gardens we kept as memorials. Meadow, Dante said after a while, his voice serious. You need to understand something. By saving me, you've made yourself visible to dangerous people. Paolo will eventually figure out I'm alive. When he does, he'll look for where I've been, who helped me. Ice formed in my stomach. He'll come here. Yes, and when he does. Dante struggled to sit up further, wincing. When he does, you need to have already told someone official what happened. File a police report. Contact the FBI. Something that creates a record, so that if anything happens to you, there's a trail. The thought of contacting authorities, of trying to explain this bizarre situation to skeptical strangers, made my chest tight with anxiety. I don't do well with police. They ask rapid-fire questions and expect immediate responses, and my brain doesn't work that way. Last time I had to deal with them, someone broke into my greenhouse. They decided I was suspicious because I couldn't maintain eye contact. Then I'll help you prepare what to say. We'll write it down. Practice until you're comfortable." His determination was palpable. "I won't let helping me be what gets you hurt." "You can't control that," I pointed out logically. "You can barely walk." "Then I'll have to get stronger quickly." He tried to stand, made it approximately 3 seconds before his legs buckled, and I had to catch him. My arms around his waist, his weight heavy against me, both of us breathing hard from the effort. This close, I could smell the botanical compounds I'd administered mixing with his own scent. Cedar, and something darker, like earth after rain. The physical contact should have been overwhelming, should have sent my sensory processing into overload. But it didn't, and that scared me more than the threat of Paolo finding us. "Back to the cot," I managed, trying to sound clinical and failing. "You're still recovering. The ricin is in your liver, kidneys, everywhere. Pushing yourself now will just damage organs further." He allowed me to guide him back down, but his hand caught mine as I turned to leave. "Thank you," he said in Italian. "Not just for saving my life, for treating me like a person instead of a monster." I looked at our joined hands, his scarred and calloused, mine stained with plant matter and soil. "You are a person," I replied simply. "People are capable of both monstrous and miraculous things, sometimes simultaneously." His thumb traced the back of my hand, the gesture unconscious, or perhaps deliberate. I could never tell with these things. What if the monstrous outweighs the miraculous? Then you work to shift the balance. That's what you're trying to do, isn't it? By leaving, by choosing Sophia over the organization. Something in his expression shifted, and before I could process what was happening, he'd pulled me closer, his free hand coming up to cup my face with unexpected gentleness. "Sei straordinaria," he whispered. "You are extraordinary." My brain short-circuited, unable to determine if this was gratitude or something else, unable to read the intention behind eyes that looked at me like I was something precious instead of strange. "I should check your liver enzyme levels," I blurted, pulling back awkwardly. "The milk thistle should be reducing inflammation, but I want to verify." If he was amused or disappointed by my retreat, his face didn't show it. He simply nodded, settling back against the pillows I'd arranged. But as I moved around the greenhouse gathering supplies for the next round of treatments, I was hyper-aware of his gaze following me, and of the particular way my heart was now beating. Not the rapid staccato of anxiety, but something slower, deeper, more dangerous. Outside, Newark was waking up. Soon I'd need to call someone, figure out how to protect us both from whatever was coming. But for now, in this moment, my greenhouse remained what it had always been. A sanctuary. Just one that now held far more than plants. By the third day, Dante could walk the length of my greenhouse without collapsing, though his movements remained careful, measured. I'd created a protocol, monitoring his kidney function through urinalysis, checking for protein breakdown, adjusting his treatment based on symptoms. It was methodical, scientific, safe. What wasn't safe was the way we'd fallen into a rhythm that felt too comfortable, too right. He'd started helping with plant care, moving slowly but precisely, following my instructions about water temperature and soil pH with the same attention he'd described giving his orchids. "This one," he said, gently touching the leaves of my Datura stramonium, "is toxic, yes? Extremely. Devil's trumpet. Contains tropane alkaloids that cause hallucinations, paralysis, death." I was repotting a nearby succulent, my hands steady with the familiar task. But in controlled doses, compounds from Datura have been used for centuries in medicine. Pain relief, muscle relaxation. "Poison and cure in the same plant," Dante observed. "Depends on how you use it." "Like people," I replied, then felt my cheeks heat at the obvious metaphor. That was too on the nose. Sorry. His laugh was warm, genuine. I liked it. You don't filter your thoughts the way most people do. It's refreshing. Most people find it off-putting. I'm not most people. He'd moved closer without me noticing, close enough that I could see the slight tremor still present in his hands. And you're not off-putting, Meadow. You're honest. There's a difference. Before I could respond, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a Newark area code. I stared at it with the particular dread I reserved for unexpected social interaction. Do you need to answer that? Dante asked. No. Probably a sales call. But even as I said it, something felt wrong. The timing, the persistence as it rang and rang. Dante's expression had shifted too, his body language subtly changing to something more alert, more dangerous. Answer it, he said quietly. Put it on speaker. My hand shook slightly as I accepted the call. Hello. Meadow Gallagher? The voice was smooth, professional, with an accent similar to Dante's but sharper. My name is Paolo Russo. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Dante's face went completely still, carved marble without any give. He mouthed a single word. Careful. I don't know what you mean, I said, which was technically true. I didn't know what Paolo considered his property. Don't insult my intelligence, signorina. I know Dante Marchetti came to your location 4 days ago. I know he's still there, and I know you've been treating him. Paolo's voice remained pleasant, conversational. Now, I'm a reasonable man. Dante clearly coerced you somehow. You're not responsible for his choices. Simply tell me where you are, and we'll resolve this without any unpleasantness. My autism sometimes meant I missed social cues, but I understood threats perfectly well. They were clear, direct, honest. No, I said simply. Paolo's silence stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Finally, excuse me? No, I won't tell you where I am. And Dante didn't coerce me. He was dying, and I chose to help him because I have the knowledge to do so. My voice came out flatter than I intended, stripped of the emotional inflection neurotypical people use to soften difficult messages. Now please don't call again. I ended the call, then immediately looked at Dante. Did I do that wrong? Should I have pretended to cooperate? He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. You just told a Mafia enforcer no and hung up on him. Was that incorrect? Anxiety spiked through me. I don't understand the social protocol for death threats. There isn't one. Dante crossed to me in 3 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders. Not hard, not threatening, but grounding. Meadow. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. I'm not sure which. Probably foolish, I admitted, but lying seemed worse. He knew you were here anyway. How? Dante's mind was clearly racing. How did he find us? I thought through the logical possibilities. Your phone? If you had it on you when you arrived. I ditched it before I came here. He was already checking his pockets anyway. Nothing electronic. Then, I analyzed the variables, the timeline. He must be working backward from the hospital records. You were poisoned 6 hours before you arrived here. In that time, you traveled approximately. How far did you get? I was in the warehouse district when I started feeling symptoms. Maybe 3 miles from here. So he's searching a 3-mile radius. My greenhouse wasn't exactly hidden. Anyone doing aerial surveillance or checking property records would find it. We need to leave. No. Dante's voice was firm. This is your sanctuary, your life. I'm not destroying it because... It's already destroyed, I interrupted, gesturing around the space that suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. The moment he knows you're here, this place stops being safe. For me, for the plants, for... I stopped, my logical brain catching up to emotional reality. For Sophia. He knows about her, doesn't he? Dante's expression answered before his words did. Paolo knows about her. But she's with her mother in Buffalo. Different surname, no obvious connection to me. She's safe. For now, I said, until Paolo decides to use her as leverage. I watched Dante's face cycle through reactions. Denial, anger, resignation, calculation. It was easier to read than most people's expressions. Maybe because the emotions were so intense they broke through his usual control. I need to call someone, he said finally. Someone I trust, or used to trust. He looked at me. Can I use your phone? Mine is somewhere at the bottom of the Passaic River. I handed it over, watching as he dialed from memory, his fingers steady despite everything. Marco. Dante's voice shifted into something harder, colder. It's me. Yes, I'm alive, which I'm sure is disappointing. No, I'm not coming in. Because Paolo poisoned me, you cazzo. The Italian curse word emerged with particular venom. And before you pretend surprise, I know you were there when he made the decision. The response was loud enough that I could hear the other man's voice, though not the words. Dante's expression grew progressively darker. Tell him this, Dante said, his voice dropping to something quiet and lethal. I have insurance, documents, recordings, account numbers, encrypted and set to release if anything happens to me, or to Sophia, or... His eyes found mine. To an innocent botanist named Meadow Gallagher, who had nothing to do with any of this. He makes a move against any of us, and everything goes public. More talking from the other end. Dante waited it out with visible patience. I don't care if Paolo believes me or not. I care that he knows the stakes. A pause. 1 week. I need 1 week to get my affairs in order and then I'm gone. Out of the family, out of the city, out of his life. Tell him. Tell him he wins. I'm not fighting for territory or power. I just want to leave. He ended the call, then stood there holding my phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Did you really prepare insurance? I asked. Documents and recordings? No. He handed my phone back, his expression grim. But Paolo doesn't know that. And with the history we have, the operations I've been part of, he'll believe I could have compiled something damaging. So you're bluffing. I'm buying time. He moved to the window, looking out at the parking area beyond the greenhouse. 1 week to figure out how to disappear completely. I processed this information, running through scenarios with the same systematic approach I used for complex botanical problems. You can't disappear alone. Paolo will find you eventually. You said so yourself. And you can't disappear with Sophia without her mother's cooperation. Maria won't cooperate. Dante's voice was heavy with certainty. She made it clear when I found out about Sophia. I could visit, send money, but involvement in her life? She saw what I was, what I did, and decided Sophia was better off without me. She's not wrong. She's partially wrong, I corrected. Sophia needs financial support, which you provide. But she also needs a father who's present, stable, safe. Currently, you're none of those things because you're stuck in a life you're trying to leave. Dante turned back to me, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. Where are you going with this, Meadow? I wasn't entirely sure. My brain was making connections faster than I could articulate, seeing patterns that might solve multiple problems simultaneously. You need to disappear. I need to leave this location because Paolo knows about it. Sophia needs a father who's alive and safe. Her mother needs assurance that you won't bring danger into Sophia's life. Yes, Dante said slowly, all of those things are true. So we solve them together. The solution felt obvious once I'd laid out the variables. You know how to navigate criminal organizations and evade tracking. I know about obscure locations, plant-based income streams, sustainable living. Together, we could create something impossible for either of us alone. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're suggesting we run away together. A mafia boss and a botanist. To do what, exactly? To start over. I was gaining confidence in the idea now, the logical framework supporting itself. Somewhere rural, somewhere your expertise in security and my expertise in cultivation could combine into something sustainable. A legitimate business. A life. And Sophia? Once you're established, once you can prove you're out of the life and safe, we approach her mother. Show her the change is real, permanent. Request supervised visitation at first. Build trust. I was thinking like I addressed complex botanical challenges, systematically, step by step. It might take years, but you're serious. Dante had moved closer again, his intensity focused entirely on me. You're actually serious about this. Why wouldn't I be? The question seemed obvious. You need a fresh start. I need a new location. We work well together. You understand my communication style. I understand your need for control and precision. It's logical. Meadow. His hands were on my face now, tilting it up so I had to meet his eyes. This isn't a botanical problem with a botanical solution. This is your life, your safety. You'd be giving up your greenhouse, your sanctuary, everything familiar, to help a man you've known for less than a week. 4 days, I corrected automatically. And you're right that I'm giving up familiarity. But familiarity doesn't equal good. This greenhouse is safe, but it's also lonely. I've spent 15 years here using plants as a substitute for human connection, because humans are too hard, too unpredictable. My voice caught slightly. But you're not. You're difficult in ways I understand. Your intensity, your need for precise control, your honesty about who you are. These things make sense to me. I've killed people, he reminded me, voice rough. Multiple people, in ways that weren't clean or quick. I know. You told me that already. I didn't look away from his gaze. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It does. But you're trying to be different now. Trying to build something better. That matters too. Dante's thumb traced my cheekbone, the gesture achingly gentle for someone who'd admitted to such violence. What if I can't be different? What if the monster is all there is? Then I'll use my extensive knowledge of poisons to handle the situation. I said it completely seriously, watched his eyes widen, then added, That was a joke. Sort of. Mostly. His laugh surprised both of us. Genuine, a little shocked, entirely human. Jesu Cristo, you're extraordinary. You said that before. I still don't understand why. Because you see me clearly and don't look away. His forehead touched mine, and I let myself lean into the contact even though every social script I'd learned said this was too much, too fast. Because you're offering me something I didn't think existed. Someone who knows what I am and chooses to help anyway. Then help me back, I whispered. Help me leave this greenhouse that's become a prison just like your organization. Help me try something new, something scary, something that might actually feel like living instead of just existing. The kiss happened before I could analyze it, his lips on mine, gentle and asking rather than demanding. My first thought was that he tasted like the valerian tea I'd been giving him. My second was that kissing was overwhelming but not unpleasant when it was with someone whose touch I'd already categorized as safe. We broke apart slowly, both breathing harder. This is probably a terrible idea, Dante said. Probably, I agreed, but most of my best decisions have looked terrible initially. Like saving a poisoned mafioso. Exactly like that. I stepped back, needing space to think clearly. So, logistics. We have 1 week before Paolo expects an answer. In that time, we need to research potential locations, arrange funds that can't be traced, prepare my most valuable plant specimens for transport, and develop a security protocol for the move itself. Dante was smiling now, a real smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost boyish. You've already started planning. Planning is calming. I pulled out my journal, flipping to a blank page. I can't control whether Paolo will honor his agreement, but I can control having multiple contingency plans. For the next several hours, we worked together. Dante on my laptop researching properties in remote locations, me cataloging which plants could survive transport, and which I'd need to recreate from seeds or cuttings. It was comfortable, productive, the kind of parallel work that let my overstimulated brain settle. Montana, Dante said eventually. There's a property for sale, 60 acres, existing greenhouse infrastructure, cabin on site, private access road. The listing has been active for 8 months. Property's probably negotiable. I looked at the listing he'd pulled up. The greenhouse was smaller than my current setup, but workable. The land had water access, good light exposure. What's the area's climate zone? 5B. Cold winters but manageable with proper infrastructure. My mental database clicked through plant varieties that would thrive in those conditions. We could specialize in cold-hardy medicinals, rhodiola, arnica, maybe some adaptogenic mushrooms in the wooded sections. Would that generate enough income? Practical question from someone who understood sustainable business models. Not immediately, but combined with online consulting for rare plant cultivation, maybe some specialized work with botanical research institutions. I was thinking aloud, building the framework. It's possible. Tight for the first few years, but possible. I have some resources set aside, Dante offered. Legitimate accounts Paolo doesn't know about. Not a fortune, but enough to get established. I have my inheritance from my mother. I never touched it, used my floristry income instead. I'd always planned to save it for something important, though I'd never imagined anything like this. Combined with selling my current property. We were actually doing this. Planning a life, a future, together. The absurdity hit me suddenly. 4 days ago, I'd been alone, predictable, safe. Now I was planning to run away with a recovering Mafia boss to start a botanical business in Montana. I'm having a small panic attack, I announced clinically. My heart rate is elevated, my hands are trembling, and I'm experiencing derealization. Dante immediately crossed to me, his hands on my shoulders again. Breathe with me. In for 4 counts. I followed his breathing, grateful for the structure. Slowly, my nervous system recalibrated. Thank you, I managed. Don't thank me. This is my fault. I'm dragging you into... No. I interrupted firmly. I'm choosing this, understanding that I'm terrified and choosing it anyway. His expression softened. Then we'll be terrified together. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the greenhouse in shades of amber and gold. Tomorrow we'd start executing the plan. Tomorrow the real work began. But tonight, for just a moment, I let myself imagine it. A new greenhouse in Montana, plants thriving in rich soil, Dante growing his precious orchids, and maybe, eventually, a 7-year-old girl with green eyes learning to love botany as much as I did. It was possible, terrifying, uncertain, completely outside my carefully controlled existence. But possible. The next morning, I woke on my cot to find Dante already awake, sitting at my work table with my laptop and several notebooks spread before him. The early light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, made him look almost soft, despite the tension visible in his shoulders. You didn't sleep, I observed, my voice still rough from the few hours I'd managed. Couldn't. He glanced up, and I saw the exhaustion shadowing his eyes. Been going through logistics. We have problems, Meadow. I sat up, my brain immediately shifting into problem-solving mode despite the lingering fog of interrupted sleep. What kind of problems? The Montana property requires a cash purchase. owner won't do financing, worried about complications with the previous buyer who backed out. That's $80,000 up front. He turned the laptop so I could see the listing details. Between us, we can manage it, but barely, which leaves almost nothing for transport, supplies, first year's operating costs. I moved to look over his shoulder, scanning the numbers he'd compiled. My property here could sell for around $60,000, but that'll take time. We don't have time. No, we don't. Dante's jaw tightened. Paolo will give me 1 week because he thinks I'm cornered, broken. But the moment he suspects I'm planning something viable, he'll move faster. I pulled up my own financial documents on my phone, reviewing assets with the same methodical attention I gave to botanical inventories. I have the inheritance, $42,000. You said you have legitimate savings? $38,000. Everything else is in accounts Paolo monitors or tied up in properties that are technically familia holdings. His frustration was palpable. I spent 15 years building wealth I can't actually access. The mathematics were straightforward. We were $20,000 short, possibly more depending on transport costs and whether my property sold quickly. I ran through possibilities, discarding most immediately. Loans required credit checks and time. Asking for help meant involving others in danger. There's another option, Dante said carefully, watching my face. One I hate suggesting. Tell me anyway. I know where Paolo keeps emergency reserves. Cash that's not in the main accounts. His personal insurance policy. $200,000 in a safe at his club. Dante's expression was grim. I have the combination. Used to be responsible for managing those funds before he decided I was a liability. I understood immediately what he was suggesting. You want to rob him. Not rob, reclaim. But his tone lacked conviction. That money came from operations I helped run, deals I negotiated. It's as much mine as his. Except it's not, legally or practically. I sat down across from him, needing to think this through. If you take it, you're not just leaving the organization, you're stealing from it. That changes everything. I know. His hands were fisted on the table. Believe me, I know. It means Paolo won't just let me disappear. He'll hunt me actively, make an example. But Meadow, without that money, we don't have enough to make this work. We'd be starting with nothing in a place where one bad winter could destroy everything. My logical brain warred with my instinct for self-preservation. The smart choice was obvious. Don't escalate. Don't take the money. Find another way. Except there wasn't another way, not in our timeline. What's the security situation at the club? I asked, and watched relief flash across Dante's face before he caught himself. You're considering this. I'm gathering information. There's a difference. Though not much of one, admittedly. If we're going to evaluate this option, I need complete data. Dante pulled up a document he'd apparently been working on. A detailed layout of the club, security positions, timing of guard rotations. Paolo's office is on the 3rd floor. 2 guards in the main entrance. 1 more at the 2nd floor stairs. Cameras in hallways but not in the office itself. Privacy concerns for meetings. When do guards change shifts? 3 a.m. That's when everyone's least alert, most predictable. I studied the layout, my pattern recognition abilities finding rhythm in the security protocols. The safe is behind the Canaletto painting, yes? Dante's eyebrows rose. How did you... You mentioned once that Paolo has a Canaletto landscape that cost him more than some people's houses. Where else would someone that ostentatious hide his emergency reserves? I traced the office layout with one finger. The question is access. How do we get past 3 security checkpoints without alerting anyone? We don't. Dante's voice had shifted to something colder, more calculating. The man who'd spent 15 years in this world showing through. I go alone. I know these men, know their patterns. I can talk my way past the first checkpoint, handle the second with minimal force if necessary. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. If you're going, I'm going. Meadow, this is dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous, I interrupted. And you're still recovering from ricin poisoning. Your fine motor control isn't back to baseline. I've watched you try to open bottles. Your reflexes are compromised. You need backup. He stared at me like I'd suggested something absurd, which I suppose I had. You're a botanist, not a criminal. You've probably never even gotten a speeding ticket. True. But I have advantages you don't. I ticked them off on my fingers. 1. I'm completely unexpected. No one's looking for a woman with you, especially not someone who appears harmless. 2. I'm very good at being overlooked. Part of masking for years means I know how to become invisible in social situations. 3. I can create distractions using botanical compounds if necessary. Botanical compounds? Dante repeated flatly. I crossed to my workspace, pulling out several small vials. Capsaicin extract at concentrations high enough to incapacitate without permanent damage. Valerian and chamomile compounds that in aerosol form cause rapid drowsiness. Nothing lethal. Nothing that leaves lasting effects, but enough to buy us time if things go wrong. Dante was looking at me like he'd never seen me before. You're serious. You've already been thinking about this. I'm always thinking about practical applications of plant chemistry. I set the vials down carefully. The question is whether we're actually doing this, because if we are, we need to plan meticulously. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of the decision. Finally, Dante stood, moving to the window to stare out at the morning light filtering through glass and leaves. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. We become fugitives, criminals. The life we're planning in Montana, it would have to be under new identities, complete disconnection from our pasts. I don't have much past to disconnect from, I pointed out. A father who doesn't understand me, some acquaintances I see twice a year at botanical conferences. My entire life is this greenhouse and the plants in it. And you'd give that up? Risk prison or worse? I thought about my mother, about the way she'd lived so fully in her garden that she'd literally died there rather than leave. Thought about the past 15 years of existing rather than living, of safety that had calcified into isolation. I'm already in a prison, I said quietly. Just one with better lighting and more comfortable routines. At least this way I'm choosing the risk. Dante turned back to me, and I saw the moment he made his decision. Saw it in the set of his shoulders, the way his expression shifted from conflicted to resolved. Okay, he said. We do this together. But we do it right. Detailed plan, multiple contingencies, absolute coordination. He crossed back to the table, pulling up a fresh document. We'll need to case the location first, confirm current security protocols. Then we wait for the right night, the right circumstances. For the next 6 hours, we planned. Dante detailed every aspect of the club's security, while I took notes in my precise handwriting, organizing information into categories and subcategories. We researched guard backgrounds, identified potential weak points, developed a timeline that maximized our advantages. Thursday, Dante said finally, pointing to the calendar. 3 days from now. Paolo has a meeting with the Bratva representatives. Always held off-site, usually runs past midnight. That means he won't be at the club, and security will be lighter, focused on the meeting location instead. What about Marco, the man you called? I asked. Will he be at the meeting? Yes, and that's good for us. Marco's the one person who might recognize that something's wrong if he sees me. I added this to our growing list of variables. So, Thursday night, after 3 a.m., we have approximately a 30-minute window between guard shifts, long enough to get in, access the safe, get out. Assuming nothing goes wrong, Dante added darkly. Plans should assume things will go wrong. That's why we need contingencies. I flipped to a new page in my notebook. Contingency 1. If we're spotted entering, we abort immediately and use the service exit you mentioned. Contingency 2. If we're spotted inside but can still reach the safe, we take only what we can carry quickly and exit through the third-floor fire escape. Contingency 3. Meadow. Dante's hand covered mine, stopping my frantic writing. We're going to be okay. We're good at this. Planning, precision, working together. I looked at our joined hands, at the visible tremor still present in his fingers, the reminder that he was still healing. Are you sure you're well enough for this? Physically, I mean. I have to be. His voice was firm. Because if we don't do this now, while we have the opportunity, we'll lose our window entirely. He was right, logically. But the risk felt enormous, the potential for failure catastrophic. I'd spent my entire life avoiding situations I couldn't control, and now I was planning to walk directly into maximum unpredictability. I'm scared, I admitted, because honesty was easier than pretending. Good. Fear makes you careful. Dante squeezed my hand gently. I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of the alternative, of Sophia growing up knowing her father couldn't find the courage to change. That reasoning I understood. Not for Sophia, whom I'd never met, but for the version of myself I might become if I let fear keep me in this greenhouse forever. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Thursday night. We do this. The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normal time. We continued monitoring Dante's recovery, his liver enzymes finally returning to acceptable levels, his stamina improving. I began the careful process of preparing my most valuable specimens for eventual transport, taking cuttings and collecting seeds while trying not to think about which plants I'd have to abandon. Dante made several reconnaissance trips to the club, confirming security patterns and timing his observations with the precision of someone who'd spent years in this world. Each time he left, I found myself staring at the door, heart racing until he returned safely. You're anxious when I'm gone, he observed after the third trip, finding me systematically reorganizing my entire seed collection, a sure sign of stress. I'm anxious generally, I replied, not looking up from the careful sorting. But yes, more so when you're potentially in danger. He sat beside me on the floor where I'd spread out hundreds of seed packets, each one meticulously labeled. This categorization system is remarkable. You've organized by both botanical family and geographic origin, and toxicity level, and medicinal properties, and difficulty of cultivation. I gestured to the color-coded labels. Cross-referencing makes information retrieval more efficient. It's beautiful, he said, and something in his tone made me finally look at him. The way your mind works, it's beautiful. I didn't know how to respond to that. Most people found my systematic thinking exhausting or strange, not beautiful. In my world, Dante continued, picking up a packet of aconitum seeds, the most successful people are the ones who can see patterns others miss, who can organize chaos into something understandable. He smiled slightly. You'd have been dangerous in the Familia Meadow. That brain of yours would have made you invaluable. I don't want to be invaluable to dangerous people, I said quietly. I want to be valued by people who won't use me and then discard me when I'm no longer useful. His expression shifted to something pained. Is that what you think I'm doing? Using you? No. I was surprised to realize I meant it. You're honest about what you need and what you're offering in return. That's not using, that's partnership. Complicated, possibly ill-advised partnership, but partnership nonetheless. Possibly ill-advised, he repeated with dark amusement. That's one way to describe planning a heist with your poisoning victim. Technically, you're my poisoning patient, not victim. I returned to sorting seeds, the familiar motion calming. There's a difference. Of course there is. He watched me work for a moment, then asked, "What will you miss most about this place?" The question caught me off guard, forced me to really consider it. "The predictability," I said finally. "Knowing exactly where everything is, what each day will hold. The garden responds to consistent care with consistent results. No surprises, no sudden changes." "That sounds safe," Dante observed, "but also lonely." "Very lonely," I admitted. But safe and lonely felt better than unsafe and connected. Until now. What changed? I looked at him. This man who'd quite literally fallen through my door dying, who'd trusted me with his life, who was now trusting me with his future. You made connection feel safer than isolation. That's what changed. Thursday arrived with slate-gray skies and the threat of rain. We spent the day in careful preparation, Dante reviewing the layout once more, me preparing the botanical compounds we might need. By evening, we were as ready as we'd ever be. "Last chance to back out," Dante said as we prepared to leave. "We could still find another way." No, we couldn't. I secured the small bag of supplies across my body. "We've analyzed every option. This is the only viable one." He pulled me close, his forehead against mine. "Stay close to me in there. No matter what happens, we stay together." "Together," I agreed, letting myself lean into his strength for just a moment. Then we left the greenhouse, locking the door behind us, and drove toward whatever waited in the dark heart of the city. The club occupied a refurbished warehouse in the industrial district, its exterior deliberately unremarkable, just another aging brick building among dozens. But I could see the telltale signs Dante had taught me to recognize. The 2 new security cameras disguised as old fixtures, the reinforced door frames, the way the windows on upper floors had been replaced with bulletproof glass that caught light differently than standard panes. We parked 2 blocks away, as planned. Dante had changed into dark clothing that looked expensive but not flashy, the kind of thing that suggested legitimate business rather than criminal intent. I wore simple black pants and a jacket, my hair pulled back, looking like exactly what I was pretending to be, an administrative assistant working late. "Ready?" Dante asked, his hand finding mine in the darkness of the car. "No. But we're doing it anyway." I squeezed his fingers, then released them. "Remember, if anything feels wrong, we abort." "If anything feels wrong, we abort," he repeated, making it a promise. We approached from the side street, where Dante had identified a service entrance that saw less traffic. 3:15 a.m. We were in the window between guard shifts, when the night crew was tired and the morning shift hadn't yet arrived. The first checkpoint was exactly where Dante had predicted. A bored-looking man in his 30s, reading something on his phone, a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He looked up as we approached, his expression shifting from indifference to recognition to confusion in quick succession. "Dante?" He stood quickly. "Boss, what are you—" "Everyone said you were taking a break," Dante interrupted smoothly, his accent thickening slightly. "You know how Paolo gets when he thinks you're not committed enough. Figured I'd lay low for a while, let things calm down." The guard, Tommy, according to his name tag, looked uncertainly between Dante and me. "And she is?" "My accountant." Dante's arm settled around my waist with casual possessiveness. "Running numbers for some investments. Paolo knows about it. You can call him if you want, but he's in a meeting with the Russians right now, and you know how he feels about interruptions." The implied threat worked. Tommy paled slightly at the thought of disturbing that particular meeting. No, of course not. Just surprised to see you, that's all. You want me to let Mr. Russo know you're here?" "Better not. Paolo wanted this kept quiet. Just some paperwork I need from my old office." Dante smiled, and I recognized it as the dangerous one, the one that didn't reach his eyes. We'll be in and out. You didn't see us, capiche? Tommy nodded quickly. Didn't see nothing, boss. We moved past him, and I felt Dante's grip on my waist tighten momentarily. Relief or tension, I couldn't tell. The hallway beyond was dimly lit. Corporate beige walls that had probably been installed during the building's legitimate business days. One down, Dante murmured, as we climbed the stairs to the second floor. If we're lucky, the second guard won't... He cut off as we rounded the corner and nearly collided with someone. Not the guard Dante had expected, but a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. Dante Marchetti. Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone unsurprised by anything. Interesting. The rumors of your death appear to be greatly exaggerated. Rosa. Dante's entire body had gone tense beside me. You're working nights now? Someone has to keep this place running while you boys play your games. She looked me over with the thorough assessment of someone trained to notice details. Who's your friend? My accountant, I said, before Dante could respond. I'd practiced this, rehearsed it until the lie came out smoothly. Here to retrieve some files Mr. Marchetti needs for his personal portfolio. Rosa's laugh was dry as desert sand. His accountant, of course. She turned back to Dante. Does Paolo know you're here? Does Paolo know you're skimming from the poker room receipts? Dante's voice had gone cold, deadly. I've seen the numbers, Rosa. About 15,000 missing over the past 6 months. The hallway went very quiet. Rosa's hand moved slightly toward her phone, then stopped. I'm not here to cause problems, Dante continued. I'm here for what's mine, and then I'm gone. You let us pass, continue your profitable side business, and we all walk away happy. You try to stop us, and Paolo learns exactly how you've been supplementing your income. The tension stretched so tight I could feel it humming in my bones. My hand had unconsciously moved to the small vial of capsaicin extract in my pocket, fingers wrapping around it in preparation. Finally, Rosa stepped aside. Third floor office, I assume. You have 20 minutes before the shift change. After that, I can't guarantee anything. Understood. Dante moved past her, pulling me along. And Rosa, grazie. Don't thank me, Dante. Just disappear properly this time. The Familia doesn't need the drama of hunting you down. We took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart hammering so hard I was certain everyone in the building could hear it. The third floor was deserted, exactly as Dante had predicted. Most of the real business happened on lower levels, or in basement rooms I didn't want to think about. Paolo's office door was locked, but Dante produced a key. Apparently they'd never gotten around to changing the locks after his fall from grace. Inside, the space was aggressively masculine. Dark wood, leather furniture, and artwork that was probably worth more than my entire greenhouse. The Canaletto was exactly where Dante had described, a sweeping Venetian landscape that I might have appreciated under different circumstances. Now I just watched as Dante carefully lifted it from the wall, revealing the safe behind. Stand by the door, he instructed quietly. Watch the hallway. If you see anything, I know. Warn you immediately. I positioned myself where I could see both the corridor and Dante's progress with the safe. His fingers moved over the combination lock with practiced precision, though I noticed the slight tremor that still persisted from the poisoning. 20 seconds. 30. The soft click of the mechanism disengaging was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Inside the safe were stacks of bills, bound and organized with the same careful precision Dante brought to his orchids. He began transferring them to the messenger bag he'd brought, moving quickly but methodically. How much? I asked, keeping my voice low. More than we expected. Maybe 250, possibly 300,000. He was almost smiling now, relief and something like vindication in his expression. This is going to work, Meadow. We can actually do this. That's when I heard the footsteps. Dante. My voice came out sharper than intended. Someone's coming. He swore in Italian, shoving the last stacks into the bag and swinging it over his shoulder. The footsteps were getting closer. Heavy, measured, more than one person. "Fire escape," Dante said, already moving to the window. But the footsteps had reached the door, and we were out of time. The door opened to reveal not a guard, but Marco, the man Dante had called, Paolo's current right hand. Behind him stood two others, both armed, both professional. "Dante." Marco's voice carried profound disappointment. "I really hoped Rosa was wrong when she called. Hoped you were smarter than this." "Rosa sold us out," I said, the betrayal feeling oddly distant through my adrenaline. "Rosa survived," Marco corrected. "By knowing when to cut her losses. Something you should have learned, Dante." Dante had positioned himself slightly in front of me, his body language protective. "Let her go, Marco. She's not part of this." "The accountant?" Marco's smile was thin. "Please, I know you better than that. You don't trust civilians with anything important." His eyes found mine. "Which means she's either something very different or someone you care about. Either way, she's leverage." My hand had been in my pocket this whole time, fingers wrapped around the capsaicin vial. In one smooth motion, practiced at home until it became muscle memory, I pulled it out, uncapped it, and threw the contents directly at Marco's face. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Marco screamed, his hands flying to his eyes as the concentrated capsaicin, approximately 3 times stronger than police-grade pepper spray, did its work. The two guards behind him instinctively moved to help him, creating exactly the confusion we needed. "Go." I shoved Dante toward the window he'd already unlatched. We went through together, my feet finding the fire escape's metal grating as alarms began shrieking behind us. Dante was already descending, taking the stairs 3 at a time despite his still-healing body. I followed, my systematic brain noting irrelevantly that we were approximately 40 feet above ground level, that the drop from each platform was 12 feet, that the mathematical probability of injury was increasing with each rush step. Shouts echoed above us. The guards had recovered enough to give chase. Dante reached the final ladder, the one that required pulling down to extend to ground level. It stuck. Rust or disuse or just cosmically bad luck. "Other side." I pointed to the neighboring building's fire escape, maybe 6 feet away. A gap that looked much larger from this height, especially in darkness, especially with armed men descending behind us. Dante looked at me, then at the gap, then back at me. "Can you make that jump?" "I don't know. I've never jumped between buildings before. It's not a typical botanical application." My voice had gone flat with terror, all emotion stripped away by my brain's emergency protocols. "Meadow." He gripped my shoulders. "I need you to try. On 3. 1. Wait, I need to calculate the distance to velocity ratio. 2. This is a terrible. 3. We jumped together, that awful moment of suspension where gravity seemed negotiable, where my systematic brain shut down entirely because there was no data set for this, no pattern to follow. We landed hard on the neighboring fire escape, the metal groaning under the impact but holding. Behind us, I heard the first guard attempting the same jump, heard the thud and curse as he didn't quite make it, catching the railing instead of the platform. That gave us maybe 30 seconds. We scrambled down the remaining stories, my hands scraped raw from the rough metal railings. Finally, ground level. We ran through an alley that smelled of garbage and rain, Dante still carrying the bag of money, me gasping for breath as my non-athletic body protested the unprecedented exertion. "Car," Dante managed, pointing. We reached his vehicle just as I heard the guards emerging from the building behind us. Dante was driving before I'd even fully closed my door, tires squealing as we accelerated away from the club. Neither of us spoke for the first several minutes, too focused on breathing, on processing what had just happened. Dante drove with the kind of precision that spoke to muscle memory, evasive maneuvers that probably came from years of practice I didn't want to contemplate. Finally, when we'd put several miles and numerous turns between ourselves and pursuit, he pulled into a 24-hour supermarket parking lot and killed the engine. "You threw capsaicin extract at Marco's face," he said, staring straight ahead. "Yes, it seemed like the logical response to the situation." "You jumped between buildings. That was significantly less logical. I don't recommend it." He turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not gratitude or relief, but wonder. "You're incredible. You know that?" "I'm terrified," I corrected. "There's a difference. You can be both." He reached over, his hand finding mine, and I let myself grip it tightly enough that it probably hurt. "We did it, Meadow. We actually did it." "We're fugitives now," I pointed out. "Rosa called Marco, which means Paolo knows we were there, knows we took the money. He won't honor the 1-week agreement." "No, he won't." Dante's jaw tightened. "Which means we leave tonight. No waiting, no going back to the greenhouse." The greenhouse. My sanctuary for 15 years. The plants I'd cultivated, the systems I'd built, the one place in the world that made complete sense to me. "I need to at least pack some specimens," I said. "Seeds, cuttings. It's too dangerous." His voice was gentle but firm. "Paolo's people will be watching the greenhouse, waiting for us to return. We can't risk it." Logic agreed with him. Emotion rebelled violently. "Then I have nothing. No plants, no tools, no—" "You have me," Dante interrupted. "You have enough money to rebuild anywhere we choose. And you have the most valuable thing, that remarkable brain of yours. The rest we can replace." He was right. Objectively, perfectly right. But that didn't stop the grief that rose in my throat, sharp and choking. Dante pulled me closer, letting me press my face against his shoulder as I fought for composure. His shirt smelled like adrenaline, and the botanical compounds I'd prepared, familiar and grounding. "I'm sorry," he murmured against my hair. "I'm so sorry this cost you your sanctuary." "It's not your fault," I said, because it was true. I'd made every choice that led here, eyes open, understanding the consequences. And you gave me something in exchange. A different kind of sanctuary. A person instead of a place. His arms tightened around me. "Then let's go find our new place. Together." We drove through what remained of the night, putting miles between ourselves and Newark. Dante had cash from the heist. I had my phone with access to my accounts. We'd figure out the rest as we went. By the time dawn broke, we were somewhere in Pennsylvania, exhausted and rattled, but free. The first phase of our escape was complete. Now came the harder part, learning how to actually live. Montana in October was nothing like I'd imagined. The air felt thinner, cleaner, carrying scents of pine and approaching winter that were completely foreign to my New Jersey-adapted senses. We'd driven for 4 days, taking circuitous routes and paying cash for everything, until we finally arrived at the property Dante had found. 60 acres of rough land, a greenhouse in need of repair, and a cabin that had character, according to the listing, which meant it had mice, questionable plumbing, and windows that didn't quite seal properly. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Dante looked at me like I'd lost my mind. We were standing in what would generously be called the living room, surveying water damage and peeling wallpaper. "Meadow, there's mushrooms growing in the bathroom. Actual mushrooms. Probably Pizzica domiciliana, common in damp conditions, not dangerous." I moved to examine them more closely, my botanical curiosity overriding any normal person's disgust. "Actually, they're a good indicator of where we need to prioritize moisture remediation." He laughed. That surprised, genuine laugh I'd learned meant I'd said something unexpectedly perfect. Only you would see house mushrooms as helpful data points. The first month was brutal. We lived in organized chaos, working from dawn until dark to make the cabin habitable and the greenhouse functional. Dante threw himself into physical labor with the single-minded intensity he'd once applied to criminal enterprises, patching roof leaks and replacing rotten boards despite his body's protests. I focused on the greenhouse, carefully prioritizing what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. We'd managed to salvage more than I'd expected. During our flight from Newark, Dante had contacted someone he trusted, a cousin who owed him a favor and asked no questions, who'd entered my greenhouse and shipped my most valuable specimens to a P.O. box in Montana. Not everything survived the journey, but enough did that I had the foundation for rebuilding. The Amorphophallus titanum cutting I'd been nurturing for 6 years, a selection of my rare medicinal herbs, seeds from plants I'd spent years cultivating, small salvaged pieces of the life I'd left behind, carefully packed with someone else's understanding hands. "Your cousin didn't have to do that," I said when the boxes arrived, carefully unpacking each specimen like the treasure it was. Lucia understands the importance of plants. Dante was reading the included note, his expression soft. She says she's glad I finally found someone who gets the obsession. Also that I'm an idiot for whatever I did that required fleeing the state. But she hopes I'm happy. "Are you?" I asked, suddenly needing to know. "Happy?" He looked around the partially repaired cabin, at the boxes of plants, at me with dirt under my fingernails and exhaustion shadowing my eyes. "I'm terrified, stressed, and working harder than I have in years." He crossed to me, his hands framing my face with the gentleness that never failed to surprise me. "And yes, I'm happy. Are you?" I considered the question seriously, as I did most things. I missed the predictability of my old life, the certainty of knowing exactly what each day would hold. I leaned into his touch. But I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss feeling like I was just existing rather than living. Even with mushrooms in the bathroom? Especially with mushrooms in the bathroom. They're a problem I understand how to solve. We fell into routines, because both of us needed structure to function. Mornings were for greenhouse work, me cataloging plants and planning propagation strategies, Dante learning cultivation techniques with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Afternoons for cabin repairs, evenings for planning our future business. Cold, hardy medicinals, I explained during one of our evening sessions, showing him my growing database of potential crops. Rhodiola rosea for adaptogenic properties, Arnica montana for inflammation, various Artemisia species. There's a market for organic, sustainably harvested medicinals, especially among herbalists and alternative medicine practitioners. Dante studied the information with the same focus he'd once applied to criminal operations. Profit margins? Variable. Lower than conventional agriculture initially, but with premium pricing for quality and rarity. We'd need to establish reputation, build relationships with buyers. I pulled up another spreadsheet. I've been researching online presence, educational content about plant medicine, maybe YouTube videos about sustainable cultivation, combined with direct sales to practitioners. You've already thought this through completely. I've had a lot of thinking time while repairing greenhouse panels. I gestured to my hands, currently covered in small cuts from handling glass. The botanical knowledge is just raw data. Turning it into sustainable business requires different framework. That's where I come in. Dante's expression had shifted into what I'd learned to recognize as his strategic planning mode. I know logistics, distribution, how to structure operations efficiently. I can't contribute to the botanical aspects, but I can build the business infrastructure around it. This was how we worked. Complementary skills, mutual respect, honest assessment of strengths and limitations. It felt nothing like the performing I'd done my entire life trying to fit into neurotypical expectations. This felt like genuine partnership. 6 weeks after arriving, we got our first test. I was in the greenhouse, carefully transplanting some rhodiola seedlings, when Dante appeared in the doorway with an expression I'd learned to dread, controlled but concerned. "Someone's here," he said quietly. "Car coming up the access road." My heart rate immediately spiked. "Paolo?" "Don't know yet, but the car's a rental, not the kind his people typically use." He'd already positioned himself where he could see but not be easily seen. "Stay in the greenhouse. If anything goes wrong..." "We go through the back exit to the tree line. I know the plan." We'd rehearsed various scenarios obsessively, both of us too aware of what pursuit from Paolo would mean. The car pulled up, a standard sedan, dusty from the rural roads. The door opened, and a woman emerged. Mid-30s, professional clothing, carrying a briefcase. Definitely not one of Paolo's enforcers. Dante had moved to intercept her before she reached the cabin. I watched through the greenhouse glass, my hands still holding the transplant I'd been working on, unable to continue, but unable to set it down either. They spoke for several minutes, too far away for me to hear. The woman showed him something. Identification of some kind. Dante's body language shifted from defensive to something I couldn't quite read. Finally, he gestured for me to join them. "Meadow, this is Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI." Dante's voice was carefully neutral. "She has some information we need to hear." Agent Chen extended her hand, which I shook awkwardly with my dirt-covered fingers. "Ms. Gallagher, sorry to appear unannounced, but we've been monitoring communications related to Paolo Russo's organization." "Monitoring," I repeated. "As in, you know about the money we took?" "Among other things." She pulled a tablet from her briefcase, showing us a series of surveillance photos. "Paolo reported the theft, as expected, but he also made claims about Mr. Marchetti kidnapping you, Ms. Gallagher, holding you against your will, using you as leverage." I felt my expression flatten, the mask I wore when people made assumptions about my capacity for agency. "I'm here voluntarily. I helped plan the theft." I threw capsaicin extract at his associate's face. "I'm a willing participant in everything that's happened." Agent Chen actually smiled. "That's what we suspected, but we had to verify." She swiped to another image. "The reason I'm here is that Paolo's organization is currently under federal investigation. Has been for 18 months. We have considerable evidence of racketeering, extortion, money laundering, all the standard charges." "And you want Dante to testify?" I said, seeing where this was leading. "We want Mr. Marchetti to consider cooperating, yes. His insider knowledge would be valuable." She looked at Dante directly. "In exchange, we can offer witness protection, relocation assistance, clean records for both of you regarding the theft." Dante had gone very still beside me. "And if I refuse?" "Then we continue building our case without you. It'll take longer, be more difficult, but it's not dependent on your cooperation." Agent Chen closed her tablet. "However, I should mention that Paolo is actively looking for you. He has significant resources, and while you've done well covering your tracks so far, he's patient and motivated. So we choose between hiding indefinitely or helping you put him away," I summarized. "Essentially." Agent Chen pulled out a business card, handing it to Dante. "Think about it. You have my direct number. Whatever you decide, we're not interested in prosecuting either of you for the theft. The money came from criminal enterprises anyway. Our focus is the larger organization." After she left, Dante and I sat on the cabin's front steps, watching the dust from her car settle back onto the access road. "What are you thinking?" I asked finally. "That I spent 15 years building Paolo's empire, protecting it, making it stronger." His voice was heavy. "And that I have a chance to help tear it down, to make sure Sophia never has to worry about her father's past following her." "Testifying means returning to New York for trial," I pointed out. "Means reliving everything you're trying to leave behind." "For a few months, yes. But then it's over. Completely over. No more looking over our shoulders. No more wondering when Paolo's people will find us. He turned to me. What do you think I should do? The question surprised me. I'd assumed this was his decision alone. I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. The practical considerations are secondary to psychological peace. Practical Meadow, worried about my psychological state. I've learned to value things beyond practical data, I admitted. You taught me that. He pulled me closer, and we sat in silence, watching the Montana landscape transform in the changing light. Finally, I'm going to do it. Testify, help them build their case, end this properly. Then I'm going with you. Meadow, you don't have to. I'm going, I repeated firmly. Not because I have to, but because partnerships mean you don't face difficult things alone. That's what you've shown me. Now I'm showing you. The trial preparations took 4 months. We returned to New York, staying in a protected hotel, working with prosecutors who explained legal processes with the kind of systematic detail I found comforting. Dante spent hours in depositions, reliving years of criminal activity with visible emotional toll. I focused on supporting him, learning his stress signals, understanding when he needed space versus company, providing the kind of steady presence he'd given me during my own adaptations. Sophia came to visit twice, carefully supervised meetings arranged by her mother Maria. The first time, I watched from a distance as Dante knelt to his daughter's level, this 7-year-old girl with green eyes and dark curls who shared his intensity, his focused way of observing the world. You grow plants? Sophia asked me during the second visit, having been told I was her father's friend. I do. Medicinal plants, mostly. Ones that help people feel better. Her eyes lit up. Like magic? Like science, I corrected gently. But science that's been used for thousands of years, which makes it feel a little magical. She tilted her head, studying me in a way I recognized. Systematic assessment, cataloging information. You talk like Papa, all precise and careful. The observation pleased me more than it probably should have. Your father is very precise. It's one of the things I appreciate about him. Mama says he used to do bad things, but he's trying to be better. Sophia's 7-year-old directness was refreshing. Are you helping him be better? I glanced at Dante, who was watching us with an expression that made my chest feel tight. We're helping each other. That's how good partnerships work. The trial itself was grueling. 3 weeks of testimony, cross-examination, legal maneuvering I struggled to follow. But Dante remained steady, answering every question with the same precision he brought to orchid cultivation, making it clear that he understood the consequences of his actions while being unequivocal about Paolo's leadership of criminal operations. The verdict came on a Friday. Guilty on 17 counts. Paolo Russo would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. We flew back to Montana that same evening, both of us exhausted but lighter somehow. The weight of the past, while never fully gone, had shifted to something more manageable. Spring came to our property with the kind of aggressive beauty I hadn't known to expect. Wildflowers carpeting the meadows, everything greening with impossible speed. The greenhouse was thriving now, organized according to systems I'd refined over months of careful observation. We'd secured our first wholesale contracts with herbal medicine companies, established an online presence that was generating steady interest. I was in the greenhouse one morning, carefully pollinating my Amorphophallus titanum, which had finally, miraculously, decided to bloom when Dante appeared with his phone. Maria called, he said, and something in his voice made me stop what I was doing. She wants to know if Sophia can spend part of the summer here, get to know me better, see where I live now. The hope in his eyes was almost painful to witness. What did you tell her? That I needed to discuss it with you first. This is your space too, Meadow. If you're not comfortable, A 7-year-old with a curious mind visiting a botanical garden full of educational opportunities? I set down my pollinating brush. Yes, absolutely yes. His kiss tasted like gratitude and promise, and the particular joy of building something real from the wreckage of our pasts. Sophia arrived in June, carrying a backpack full of books and questions. She took to the property immediately, fascinated by every plant, every process. I found myself explaining cultivation techniques, chemical compounds, propagation methods to an audience who actually wanted to learn. "This one's poisonous," I told her, pointing to the aconitum. "Very beautiful, very dangerous. That's true for a lot of plants and a lot of things in life. Beautiful doesn't mean safe." "Like Papa's old job," Sophia said with her characteristic directness. "Mama says it looked exciting, but it was actually dangerous. Your mother is a wise woman. She says you're good for Papa, that you make him think about things carefully instead of just doing them." Sophia looked up at me with those green eyes. "Are you going to stay? Or are you going to leave like people always leave?" The question, delivered with such casual devastation, made my chest hurt. "I'm planning to stay. I can't guarantee forever. Life doesn't work like that. But I'm choosing to be here every single day. That's the best promise anyone can make." She considered this with visible seriousness. "Okay, that's a good answer." That evening, after Sophia had gone to bed in the cabin's small guest room we'd prepared for her, Dante and I sat in the greenhouse's small office area, reviewing the day's work. "She likes you," he said, watching me catalog new growth measurements. "Really likes you, not just tolerating you. The feeling is mutual." I looked up from my notes. "She has your intensity, your way of wanting to understand how things actually work, rather than just accepting surface explanations. She has your ability to ask uncomfortable questions with complete honesty." "Good. The world needs more people willing to be uncomfortable in pursuit of truth." Dante pulled me from my chair into his lap, a position we'd learned to navigate, him needing physical connection, me needing it in controlled doses. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for all of this. For saving my life. For building a new one with me. For welcoming my daughter into our space." "Our space," I repeated, testing the words. They felt right, solid. "That's what this is now, isn't it? Not yours or mine, but ours. If you'll have me permanently." He reached into his pocket, producing a small box. "I know traditional proposals aren't really our style, but is that an engagement ring?" I interrupted, my systematic brain already racing ahead. "Because marriage has significant legal and financial implications, we should discuss thoroughly before." "Meadow." He opened the box, revealing a simple band with a single green stone. Peridot, I recognized, the gem variety of olivine. "This isn't about legal contracts or financial merger. It's about choosing each other, intentionally and completely, every day. Will you marry me?" I looked at the ring, then at his face, then at the greenhouse around us, this sanctuary we'd built together from necessity, fear, and eventually, love. "Yes," I said, "but I need you to understand that I'm not good at traditional wife things. I won't always recognize when you need emotional support. I'll forget anniversaries. I'll probably care more about my plants than about social obligations." "I'm not looking for a traditional wife," Dante replied, sliding the ring onto my finger. "I'm looking for you, exactly as you are. Brilliant, honest, occasionally terrifying in your directness. My Meadow, who saves poisoned strangers and throws botanical weapons at armed men." "That does sound like me," I admitted. We married in September, exactly 1 year after Dante had crashed through my greenhouse door dying. The ceremony was small, just Sophia, Maria, who had grown to appreciate what Dante was building, Agent Chen, who'd become an unexpected friend, and Dante's cousin Lucia, who'd saved my plants. No churches, no formal venues. We stood in the greenhouse among the plants that had brought us together, exchanging vows we'd written ourselves. I promised to cultivate our relationship with the same care you cultivate your plants, Dante said, to provide the conditions for growth, to protect against threats, to appreciate the beauty in each stage of development. I promised to approach our marriage systematically, I replied, gathering data, adjusting protocols, optimizing outcomes. To value your complexity, respect your past while building our future, and occasionally remember that not everything needs to be analyzed before being experienced. Sophia, serving as our flower girl, whispered loudly, "Are they always this weird?" "Always," Maria whispered back, but she was smiling. That winter, our first year fully established, the business took off. Word spread about our specialty medicinals, our sustainable practices, our educational content that made complex botany accessible. We hired 2 part-time employees to help with cultivation and shipping, both of whom learned quickly that I had specific systems that needed following precisely. Dante threw himself into the business development side with the same strategic brilliance he'd once applied to less legal ventures. He was, I discovered, exceptionally good at relationship management, something I would never master but deeply appreciated in a partner. Sophia spent her school breaks with us, gradually transitioning from visitor to part of our household. She had her own small greenhouse section now, growing what she called friendly plants, herbs and flowers that were beautiful without being dangerous. "Though I want to learn about the dangerous ones too," she informed me seriously, "because you said we need to understand dangerous things to stay safe from them." That's exactly right. I was teaching her to identify local toxic plants, the same way my mother had taught me. Knowledge is protection. One evening in late January, as heavy snow blanketed our property and transformed everything into pristine white silence, Dante found me in the greenhouse. I'd been working with my datura collection, carefully extracting seeds for next season's planting. "You're thinking about something," he observed, reading my body language with the fluency he'd developed over our time together. "About trajectories," I admitted. "How small changes in initial conditions create vastly different outcomes. A year and a half ago, if you'd told me I'd be married to a former Mafia boss, running a botanical business in Montana, helping raise his daughter, I would have said the probability was statistically impossible. And now? Now I understand that probability calculations don't account for human choice." I set down my work, turning to face him fully. "Every day we choose this. Choose each other. Choose this life. Choose to be better than our past suggested we could be." He pulled me close, and I let myself fully lean into his warmth, into the steady rhythm of his heartbeat that I'd learned to find grounding. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your old sanctuary for this?" I thought about my Newark greenhouse, that safe, lonely space where I'd hidden from the world for 15 years. Thought about the predictable, isolated existence I'd built there. "I don't regret it," I said finally. The old sanctuary was beautiful, but it was also a prison I'd built for myself. This... I gestured around us at the greenhouse we'd repaired together, at the life we'd constructed from fear and necessity, and eventually love. This is real sanctuary, not a place to hide from the world, but a place to engage with it on our own terms. "Together," Dante added. "Together," I agreed. Outside, snow continued falling, covering everything in pristine white. Inside our greenhouse, surrounded by the green-growing things we'd cultivated with patience and precision, we stood together in the warmth. 2 people who shouldn't have worked, who by every logical calculation should have failed, but who had somehow, through honesty, partnership, and the choice to be better, built something lasting. A sanctuary not of isolation, but of connection. A life not of hiding, but of growing. Together.